Welcome back to this episode of The Rabbit Hole, where in this episode we'll be talking about the Cold War again. We'll be talking about how the Berlin airlift focuses with the Orthodox point of view, the revisionist point of view with Vietnam, and the post-revisionists of Afghanistan and Gorbachev. We'll have my three characters, let's call them that, Vlad and Ref, taking over for revisionist and Orthodox. They will be giving that kind of point of view with some quotes from some wonderful books, especially The Cold War by that man who I cannot pronounce for the life of me, who I will be referencing quite a lot. So, let's get into this. I'll roll that intro and give you a fun quote. Hi, I'm Ref. I've been forced to do this because if I don't, Pastor's not going to feed me for the week, and, well, he's also not going to give me whiskey. I need whiskey to live, who needs food? Anyway, so, I'm here to represent Orthodox. The Orthodox point of view, or school of thought, is commonly called the traditionalist. If you talk to your grandpa, or great-grandpa, or your dad, depending on your age and generation, they'll know what that means from their point of view, as in that's their probably point of view, as the Orthodox point of view is about how the US was just freeing nations from communist oppression. And how the US policy was at the start of the Cold War will be explained in this quote from The Cold War, another book that apparently Past has to put up every time because I am him, and he doesn't remember exactly any of the name of the author. Anyway, here's the quote. The United States was a reformist but pragmatic internationalist power that, as soon as the Cold War unfolded, struggled with its own anti-colonial commitments. That's from page 35. What?
Now say it again for the English speakers.
That was English.
Yeah, but in simple English.
Oh, okay. So, the quote I just gave you apparently isn't English enough. So let me break it down a little bit for you. Reform, each of those words, the key ones. Pragmatic, reformist, and internationalist power. And anti-colonial. Each of these are big words. So reformist are people who want to change systems and reform a system by changing rules, regulations, those kind of stuff. Pragmatic being quite nihilistic, another hard word. Kind of being very, if I can do it, yeah, but I need to be able to. Internationalist, around the world. Anti-colonial, against countries like Britain and France, who had control over nations that were not English or French. Now let me tell you why this quote is so important to Orthodox. The reformist section of that quote is showing how the US was trying to free countries from a communist oppression or royalty who, in a democratic point of view from the US, is oppressive. So the Berlin airlift is a keystone to the Orthodox point of view, as it shows how communism, and by extension the USSR/Russia, is just oppressing nations into submission without their free will. So here's a quote from the Cold War, which from now on, because I can't be bothered saying it every time, will just appear over here whenever I mention it. Or over there. Anyway, here it is. Stalin's attempts to starve half of Germany's capital into submission over the duration of almost a year convinced the three Western allies, the USA, the UK, and France, to create a West German state and a European defensive alliance, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO. Essentially, this is how some historians see the start of the Cold War, from Stalin's oppressive attempt to crush West Berlin into melding into East Germany and blocking out the West. And in a second, I'll talk about how the Berlin airlift kind of pushed the Orthodox point of view of that they were just saving people from oppression. So, hallelujah.
You forgot to mention the quote was from page 26.
But no one's gonna even read the book anyway.
Some people want to check your sources.
It was from page 26 of that book. Bugger off. So, why was the Berlin Left such a unifier? Well, it's because of money reforms that were being made in Germany at the time to reinvigorate the economy after the devastation of World War II. They needed to fix the money. So, the Western Allies did, in secret against the USSR, or Stalin in this case, because it's easier to point to a single person. Stalin hated this and blockaded West Berlin, the capital of West Germany. Basically trying to starve out Berlin and force the Allies to either give up Berlin or return that policy. The US and its allies could not afford to do this, as it would be a sign of weakness and that they would not keep their promises. They could not allow this. So, they did something quite unthinkable. They committed the Berlin Airlift, a quite genius strategy of sending planes at almost 24 hours for over a year to give supplies, almost 1 million tons of food, water, oil, fuel. It's quite amazing. And this galvanized support in Berlin and Germany as a whole to the Allies, as well as making them join up together to fight against the communist threat. So as I was saying, vodka is better than whiskey because when it hurts, and everything that is healthy hurts, or you don't like it, right? Vodka hurts. So that makes sense. Oh, yeah, I'm up here. Hello, I am here for capitalist destruction. Oh, I mean, I am here to talk about revisionism. You didn't get that on tape, right? Okay. So, hello, I'm here to talk about revisionism, and I am Vlad, your fellow communist sympathizer and helper of the destruction of capitalism. So, as I was saying, I sent all of Ref's whiskey to Germany because it's funny to mess with Ref. So he should be gone for at least a week. I hope. Anyway, I should get on to the quote, right? Yeah. So, hello, I am Vlad again, and welcome. Okay, so, unlike Ref's whiskey, I don't want my vodka to be stolen. So, I'm gonna read you a quote from Cold War book, page 15. The Soviet Union was ideologically committed to world revolution and an anti-imperialist agent that established communist hegemony. He may be gay? In Eastern Europe, while showing little interest in Afro-Asian world. What? No, I don't know what homogeny means. I don't know. Yeah, you Google it. No, wait, don't Google, that's capitalist. So, Vietnam is in the collective conscious of many Americans and even Australians, as well as other nations connected to the Vietnam War. This is because it is commonly attributed as the birthplace to revisionism, somewhat, as it was an internally pushed nation that wanted to become communist, while nations such as the US pushed against it, as well as the amount of insurgencies in the South indicated to many people that it wanted to be communist, and we were stopping them from doing it unfairly. Thus revisionism came about, how it was pro-communist and anti-US, as the US was seen as a imperial force trying to force nations into capitalism, not necessarily democracy, not South America, as well as South Vietnam and South Korea in the first years. Now let me give you a quote about Vietnam's communist ideology from page 138 of Cold War. The Vietnam Communists pursued a set of interrelated goals according to a flexible order of priorities: a struggle for sheer survival, an international reunification under their leadership, socialist construction, homogeny over all of Indochina, and world revolution. If I haven't mentioned it yet, page 138 of the Cold War book. This is all about how world revolution, pretty common in former colonies, as they hated their overlords, usually from oppression, and how it wanted to unite that communist goal against those colonial powers in a homogeny. Vietnam is in the popular consciousness of many Americans, Australians, and other nations. This is because of how it is commonly thought of as the birthplace of revisionists. Revisionism is all about how communism is the right way to go and how America is pushing its capitalist ideology on nations that did not recognize it, commonly attributed to places like the Dirty Wars in South America. There will be a rabbit hole episode on those things, but that will be on a very later date, and I do not have time to go into it. So let me give you a quote about how communist Vietnam was very internally based as a nation and communist, unlike places like Eastern Europe where it was pushed upon them by communist Soviet Union. So here's a quote from Cold War book. The Vietnam communists pursued a set of interrelated goals according to a flexible order of priorities: a struggle for sheer survival, national reunification under their leadership, socialist construction, homogeny over all of Indochina, and world revolution. Page 138. The world revolution is quite common, as many of these nations that were former colonies did not want to be associated with their capitalist overlords and oppressors. Hence the pop-up of communist nations in Asia and Africa. So, anyway, the also thing is the unation of Indochina with the word homogeny, which I comoogled, so that's good. Comoogled it. This homogeny is a united force against an opponent. And these priorities is pretty common for nations that have been split in half. North and South Korea to this day have these kind of ideologies. Anyway, I need to get on to more about the school of thought and how Vietnam works with that. So let's do that. Now, how the Vietnamese revolutionaries resonated with the young protesters of civil rights movements as well as other such things is due to their agenda being a rightful cause against US military intervention. It backed them and created the revisionist school of thought. Here's a quote from Cold War book, page 139. The Vietnamese revolutionary agenda also appealed to younger protesters in the free world. Free world, by the way, meaning America, Europe, as well as places like Australia. Anyway, back to quote. Who came to see the US military intervention in Indochina in the mid-1960s as a symbol of all ills of the Western socio-economic model. This is all about how... Yeah. We'd sing. Damn it. So when am I gonna get that vodka? I've been waiting for hours. Give it. Yeah. There you go. This is not vodka. Who gave you this?
Ref, of course.
I am going to kill him. Goodbye. I will see you next time I'm on. So you're telling me that Vlad sent Ref's whiskey to Germany, so Ref went to Germany. Then Ref sent water instead of vodka to Vlad to annoy him. Vlad left to beat up Ref, and you have no idea where they are now. Well, I guess I'm taking over anyway, so, good timing. Hello everybody, I'm Past, as you know, and let's talk about postrevisionism now, and Gorbachev as well as Afghanistan, since those two things are quite crucial to understanding that postrevisionist school of thought. So, postrevisionism is a very modern take on the Cold War, as it combines aspects of both Orthodox and revisionist. As a more general example of the overall events of the Cold War, the examples we've mentioned before with the Berlin Wall and Vietnam are both aspects of postrevisionism in the grand scheme of things. But postrevisionism is more than just going US bad in this event, US good in this event, USSR bad in this event, USSR good in this event. It's more than that. The best example is in Afghanistan, for the Soviet-Afghan War. This war is quite tricky as both the Soviets and the US helped each other in this kind of power struggle while ignoring the people on the ground. As well as for the US, it's kind of bit them in the butt. With the Soviets, they were trying to make sure a communist government stayed in power by initially building dams, airfields, other such infrastructure, and then they'd invaded to secure the government as rebels were popping up due to the atheistic stance of the government. But the US supported these rebels with their own weapons. Ironically, this would bite them in the butt during the invasion of Afghanistan, as they would use these weapons that they gave them against the US soldiers. This is kind of that postrevisionism, as postrevisionism is a perspective kind of look of school of thought, where we look at something from different aspects. As an example could be, in the modern sense, you giving money to a homeless person. Some would say that is good, you're being kind. Others would say you just gave money to a drug addict. But both may be right. You did do a kind thing, they may be also a drug addict. That's not the point. Postrevisionism is showing both sides of this coin. So, I think a figure that exemplarizes postrevisionism in the USSR, at least, is Gorbachev. Gorbachev is both a reformer who was trying to push the USSR out of falling apart and make everyone happy. He was also someone who brutally suppressed free elections in Afghanistan and Chechnya, which would follow over into the Russian Federation, which, yikes, Putin, yikes. So here's a quote from the Cold War about Gorbachev. Some agreed with Gorbachev's criticism of Stalin, but still believed in Lenin's world revolutionary dreams. Others were unrestricted Stalinists, who believed Gorbachev was selling the USSR out to the imperialist, capitalist enemy. Page 569 of the Cold War. Book up there because I always do that. Again, this shows how even in the government of the USSR, people were divided about how to feel about Stalin. Not Stalin, Gorbachev. As Gorbachev was both a reformer, as I said, as well as someone who was doing it half-hearted. So, here's an example. When he became leader, Gorbachev promised to not intervene in free elections in Eastern Europe. Not really believing this much, last time this happened, Eastern Europe got brutally crushed, but people still stood up, and free elections were happened. When communist leaders throughout the Warsaw Pact asked, hey, could you please stop them from revolting and calling free elections, Gorbachev refused. I think this is quite awesome, and while democratic forces came into power. But he also invaded Afghanistan to support a government that was deeply unpopular. You see, it's another side to the one coin. So let's talk about Afghanistan, as it's kind of another example of this post-revisionist world. So let's talk about Afghanistan more in depth now. So this quote is from Afghanistan, military history from Alexander the Great to the fall of the Taliban by Stephen Tanner. That book's a bit out of date, noting what happened in 2021, but anyway, here's the quote from page 226. Afghan requests for arms were refused by US military planners, who viewed the country vicariously as a sieve to the Soviet Union's, too unstable and undefensible against potential Red Army attacks, and just plain strategically unimportant. Showing how the American government didn't really see the Afghanistan as useful, kind of showing how they didn't care about democracy or capitalism, it was just about power. But that's a very revisionist take, because, well, it's not fair to just say that the Soviets did the same, just invaded, because it's not that simple, as the Soviets really didn't want to get involved, and it was only when they were basically forced to, as the Soviet government in Afghanistan was on its last legs, did they invade and support the communist Afghan government, pushing it back. And when it became too expensive for the Soviets to sustain it, they pulled out themselves. Then Taliban took over, 9/11, invasion, 20 years, pull out, rinse and repeat. It's probably going to happen again in the next decade here in 2022. Anyway, that's off topic. This shows that two-side coin again, as both the US and the Soviets didn't care about Afghanistan. It was just about strategical placement, and neither really wanted to get involved. But from what other sources I've found, the US military planners did eventually give arms to the Afghanis, but this was much later. So that was post-revisionism, and here's my outro, I guess. So over this video, I've learned a lot about how these schools of thought have formed, just from guesses, to be fair, but still. How Orthodox was a school of thought because we lacked information against the Soviets and we despised them at the time. Some still do, and that's fair. Revisionist being a counterculture interpretation, if you'd like, against Orthodox due to the rising in popularity of communism and against the US. Post-revisionism being how we learned about both sides quite more in depth and kind of come to the conclusion that both sides were pretty awful and good at the same time. But here's a quote from the Cold War. Yet the notion that the Cold War ended in 1989 is primarily a Eurocentric interpretation. That's page 563 of the Cold War, by the way. And it's true. When's the last time when you've been taught in school about the Cold War have you talked about Africa, South America, Korea, for crying out loud, let alone China, Indonesia, other places as well. Vietnam is one of the few exceptions outside of Europe that we talk about. But Cold War isn't really over per se. As you know, tensions between the US and Russia, as of recording this in 2022, is still quite hot. Or cold, I guess you could say. Same with relations with the US and China, as well as other places such as Iran and Saudi Arabia's Cold Wars against each other. Cold War is commonly associated with this time period of the 20th century. But it's more than that. It's a type of warfare of intelligence and a distrust of each other. We can't let that infect our points of view of this history as, well, it's something you gotta learn. But I think one thing we always need to know is take everything into account when we talk about history. So next time you do some research on the Cold War, have a look in Africa or South America. Thank you for watching and have a great day. This is me exiting the rabbit hole.